he had a really cool list where he was cutting cantrips. He bumped the land count up to 19, and he was playing a bunch of duresses, but he was also playing one merchant scroll. And I was just like, why isn't everyone playing this? So I picked up the merchant scroll tech, and I love that
And
because it lets.
is the merchant scroll solely for as a fifth gush, or did you find it coming up in more utility spots?
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
So today on Eternal Durdles, we have another pre-modern episode, and today we're going to be talking about an evolution of Grow-A-Tog. With me is Austen. So we had a fun encounter at Lobster Con, where I went to the bubble tea place down the way, and Austen is in there. He's also getting a bubble tea, and I forget exactly how you were like, oh, hey, I know the thing or whatever, but like we just started talking about the metagame at large, and then we dove into like all of the things that I was doing with Parfait, and you had some really interesting ideas, and then you started talking about what you've been doing with Grow-A-Tog, which is a cool list, and you said something that blew my mind. You were like, Phil, people have been playing Grow-A-Tog like it's Delver, and I don't think you should be playing it like Delver. I think you should be playing it like Stoneblade. And with that, I want to pass the floor to you to tell me your journey with Grow-A-Tog and how you evolved it to where you got it to LobsterCon, and then after what you learned from LobsterCon and where you're going to take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on the show. It was it was cool running into you in a weird dystopian bubble tea restaurant. Yeah, I mean, I think so. First off, I'm not a tournament grinder. I have the dubious pleasure of being the third best Growatog player at LobsterCon out of 6. No Roland Chang, but I'll do my best. I think Growatog's kind of a funny deck in the context of Premodern because it's a format with a lot of brewers. People are always pushing decks in new direction, but people will also do kind of awkward ports from other formats and then just keep jamming what the last person jammed. So it was interesting. I was on TC Decks last night and I looked at the first documented Growtog lists, and the first 4 of them are like the same 60, and they all are playing 16 lands, which is just like way too few to be playing. And after a while, the formula kind of evolved. So yeah, I think if you look at the way the deck changed, it's clearly going in a specific direction. I'm not really part of that direction. I'm kind of reacting to watching it change, but kind of where I started with the format is like a lot of people, I think a lot of people are trying to build like the Delver deck in the format because it's so tempting. It's like, why can't we have this? We have it in Legacy. And I think there are reasons that we can't have it in Premodern, like we don't have dual lands. So where I started was, I was like, well, I want to play Quirion Dryad and I want to play like Lightning Bolt. And I want to just kind of like tempo them out. And so I arrived at something that was kind of like a Grow-A-Tog list, but probably worse. And I picked up stock Grow-A-Tog and I didn't really like the mana. And it just seemed like really high variance and like it was spinning its wheels. So for a while I was working on this like Bant Threshold deck with, Mongoose and Werebear.
Mystic Enforcer.
And ironically, I was like, well, why are we playing this Mystic Enforcer card when we could play Terravore? And so it was like a Bant, not Terrageddon, but it was like a Bant deck with like Daze and Counterspell and Wasteland and Armageddon and stuff. And then I was prepping for a bigger tournament and I was fresh off, like unintentionally drawing 2 winnable matches with a control deck because I don't play in tournaments a lot and I kind of struggle with pace of play. And I was like, well, what if I played a deck that actually had threats in it so I could like not go to time all the time?
What are threats? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean something that ends the game. So
oh, wow, okay, I've never heard of those before. I'm over here trying to just put my library in my hand every game. So you got onto Terrageddon. Did that package evolve to where like you got it? Because like the list that I saw you were on for Mox Diamond, which is pretty stock for Grow-A-Tog. Although I had never seen the like how low the land counts can go. I've seen people add more cantrips to like continuously get as few lands in the deck as possible. But was the Terravore plan the thing that like led you to get to a steeper mana base that then got you to where you've started adding what I think are the cool innovations that like give it the grindier plan, where you were talking about being able to go still have that long game where you can grind against everything as a control deck, but then have the threats to be able to apply pressure to the opposing control decks?
Finding the right high-end cards for legacy, vintage, pre-modern, or old-school Magic can be challenging. That's where friends 3-for-1 trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's top Magic the Gathering retailers with an incredible selection of premium singles, sealed product, and even full sets, all available with free, fast, and secure worldwide shipping.
They add fresh inventory every Wednesday with weekly deals and discounts. So whether you're hunting for that elusive piece of power, a legacy staple, or something spicy for your collection, they've got you covered.
First high-end orders over $500 or €500, use the code EDFREE to get free worldwide shipping.
Check them out now at the number 3, the number 4, the number 1.gg/ED. That link takes you right to the shop and helps support the channel.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the legacy community. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so that actually wasn't how I got to the build that I played for LobsterCon. I basically was just wondering if what I was playing was a worse Grow-A-Tog. And so I picked up Growatog, and at that point, like, I feel like you can't really talk about the deck without talking about how Lanny has pushed it and, doing things like adding 4 Swords to Plowshare's main deck. Like, why are we not playing the best removal spell in the format? And cutting days. So that was already well underway. And that, I think, was the change that made me like the deck more, and decide that, what I was doing was basically just like a worse version of that. I played a pretty stock list with like 17 lands and like foil and days, like still more on the aggro control side. And I did well. I top 8 that tournament. But the thing that pushed me in the other direction was like, one, I like to play control decks in most formats. I'm always seeing if I can like cut a threat, add an answer, cut a creature, maybe go like Mana Leak is the 5th counterspell. But 2, shout out to Rob McCoy, who top 8'd the side event of LobsterCon last year. He had a really cool list where he was cutting cantrips. He bumped the land count up to 19, and he was playing a bunch of duresses, but he was also playing 1 merchant scroll. And I was just like, why isn't everyone playing this? So I picked up the merchant scroll tech, and I love that because it lets you pick up.
Is the merchant scroll solely for as a 5th gush, or did you find it coming up in more utility spots?
Yeah, it comes up a lot. I mean, it's really easy to get cute with something like that. Like, I mean, if you were to read down the list of weird stuff I tried to cram it to Growatog, I mean, it was like Shadow Rift, Recoil, stuff like that. I think the beauty of Merchant Scroll is the stuff you're already playing is stuff you want to grab. So yeah, it could be Gush 5, but you can grab a counterspell. If you're playing foil, you can even grab the foil and be tapped out, but also shields up, which is cool. You can grab a removal spell in Fire Ice if you're playing Fire Ice. You can grab AK just for value late game, get the grind going. So it's a really cool card in that way.
And where do you stand on Fire Ice? Is that a card that you're up to 3-4 copies of? Is that just part of the Merchant Scroll package, so to speak?
Yeah, when I was on the Merchant Scroll version of the deck, I just had 1. Obviously, it's a virtual 2, and then it's such a tight list. I mean, people cram all kinds of stuff into Growtog, which is awesome. It's kind of like it's similar to Tribe, I think, in that it has like a very rabid and dedicated following that is always trying to cook, but doesn't have like a ton of tournament appearances. But yeah, at the time I was on 1 Fire Ice. Like I said, I was playing Mana Leak. And then, once I added the blessings, those got cut, which is, it's a longer story, but it's part of the reason I like Gaea's Blessing so much.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because you played 3 copies, right?
I was playing 2 in the
copies,
main, and none of the board for LobsterCon.
Yeah, and as we saw, that was the tech that got Rich Shade over the top for the overall win. Was he just added Gaia's Blessing to Enchantress's sideboard? Has Gaia's Blessing earned its salt in a deck that's trying to attack like yours?
Well, my tournament record, let's just say the first number was smaller than the second number.
Yeah, when it comes to a winning record, like I've done this with gameplay videos that I started doing where I'm like, when we're trying to find like the optimal path, especially if like a deck hasn't been pushed in a certain direction, like as you said, like people will take Growtog and just sort of carbon copy a list and then go from there. But like if you're pushing the boundaries of something, I'm like so much more interested in, did these tools work as intended as you've been testing and as you've been doing things, more so than like, does the record bear out? Because like we're learning stuff all the way, and if you're the only one right now who's like been teching with Gaia's Blessing and this like more control-y style Stoneforge type of Grow-A-Tog, then you like I understand like iterating on that solo takes a little bit more time. So like if the records don't reflect it now, it doesn't mean that to me that like the idea isn't potent enough to continue exploring to where that record then eventually does reveal itself. But like if you were testing out Gaia's Blessing and you put him in for your deck for a certain reason, did it perform in the way that you expected it to perform and solve the problems that you were expecting it to solve, or did it surprise you in certain ways? Did it not live up to what you wanted to? Like, where was the Gaia's Blessing, particularly with this type of list? Because it being with Queen Dryad, since Queen Dryad is, you cast a non-green spell, the fact that that is a 2-mana green spell that's not going to pump your Dryad, I'm like, well, there's maybe, I don't know if that's enough tension, but there's a little bit of tension there. But then the alternative is if they kill your Dryad, then you can just put him back in your deck.
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of tension there, although it's not huge, and I think it's less the color pips or the color identity of the spell, and it's more that you're casting a 2-mana sorcery that like doesn't do a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be awkward, but overall, I love Gaia's Blessing. I was on what my friend Josh referred to as a vision quest with the deck, just like trying a bunch of weird stuff. I was like, well, maybe we can put Unearth in it as like,
Cool.
a backup creature, virtual creature that cycles, or, I was trying out things like Recoil. I just did a Scryfall search for like every buyback spell because I was like, what if we're some weird buyback deck that can grow Dryad? And I've always loved Gaia's Blessing in more controlling decks, just to like start looping your library. And Gaia's Blessing gets better when your library is smaller. And grow because you play so many cantrips and gushes and now AKs, you're really good at shrinking your deck. So it seemed like a good theory, and then I threw a couple in. I really liked the way it played. I actually pushed it all the way to something I called slow grow, which was just 4 Quirion Dryad as the only creatures and a lot more permission, which actually felt good, but I didn't want to take it to LobsterCon not testing it a bunch, and at this point it was like getting pretty close to LobsterCon. So I
Yeah.
settled on a more conventional list. I put in Mystic Enforcers, which I hadn't been playing before, but we're also feeling really good in testing. And yeah, pretty much hit send with 19 lands just to increase the number of keepable hands for mulliganing, and also with the idea that as you're adding non-land spells into your deck with Blessing, you're less likely to flood out if you get to that stage in the game.
Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe to the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Durdles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Durdle Maniacs at patreon.com/eternaldurdles.
Now back to the show. Were there any tech lands that you played in those 19 lands, or was it just to make sure that you could hit your requisite colors?
No, this was like a wholesome mana producing list, so no Cephalic Coliseum. It's just 8 island, 4 City of Brass, 4 Flooded Strand, 1 Plains, 1 Forest, 1 Windswept Heath.
And how did you feel about the island count with Gush and Foil?
Yeah, I mean, 8 islands and 4 fetches is pretty standard for most grow lists, so I wasn't monkeying with the mana base, which is something I knew I didn't want to do with not enough testing.
But that felt good?
It felt good all day. Yeah, I was never at a loss for being able to gush. I didn't deal with too much screw, and the screw that I did find myself in was against the nightmare matchup in Red Green Oathponza, where they just kind of ported me into the Stone Age. So I kind of got it out of my system against a bad matchup.
When you, after LobsterCon, when we were having the conversation of like how the play style that you've also done with the deck where you're a bit more mid-rangey than the tempo style, which, can lean a bit more aggressive when figuring out the timing of when to cast your spells. Did post LobsterCon, were there any ideas that kicked where you were like, oh, if I had only thought about this beforehand, I would come back around, make these adjustments, and then I think I would have been better suited for any issues that were coming up throughout the day?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the list felt super good all day. Like, it felt like the machine was working, the wheels were spinning. I didn't feel like I was just like flooding out all day, or like I wasn't hitting what I needed to hit. And I was able to grind really hard. I mean, I had a game against Blue-White Control where I got to cast AK for 5 and then AK for 6 and like blessing a bunch of stuff back. So it worked as intended. I mean, the one thing I did was I was pretty determined to respect burn. just going into the main event because it's not a good matchup.
Mhm.
So I played virtual 4 chill on the sideboard, 3 chill and 1 enlightened tutor. Obviously, looking at the numbers, I think burn was like 5% of the meta, down from like 15.
Mhm.
But that's all 2020 hindsight at this point.
I gotta ask, since it was a lot. It was a card that people talked about a lot before LobsterCon, but I never actually heard it in the context of Growatog potentially. But when you were saying, oh yeah, we could go down to just 4 threats in the Dryads, did you ever think or test with Tempting Worm?
I thought about Tempting Worm. Yeah, I never got around to testing it enough. I at one point I was on Nimble Mongoose main,
Mm.
but I had one iteration of the list that was playing like some number main and then some number in the board with worships coming in, and that was going to be my anti-burn tech. And I tested that. Like I just jammed, I don't know, like 20 post-board matches with each iteration against burn, and it felt way worse and was just like way worse by the numbers than chill.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I
Yeah.
didn't get to test Tempting Worm. I know some other people have tried that. I know Lanny tried it and he said it was not good. And I think
Mhm.
someone else on Discord, made themselves the guinea pig and said it didn't pan out. So yeah, that was not something I wanted to explore.
Yeah, just want to clarify for everybody who's listening that that your list is you were up to 19 lands, and then you were playing your threat suite was 12 creatures total plus 2 guys
Mhm.
blessing, and that was a Dryad, Mystic Enforcer, and
Dryad, Mystic Enforcer, and Melee Mage.
Meddling Mage. And
Yep.
did that feel like the cleanest suite, or like Meddling Mage main board is I know been stocked for Growatog for a while, but it did it feel like those were the correct numbers for your creature suite?
Yeah, I think it felt broadly right. I mean, I'm not really reinventing the wheel because I think the 10 threats, 2 of which are a top end, has been standard-ish for a while. Although you've seen Call of the Herd kind of come in and out of fashion. Mystic Enforcer felt awesome all day and in testing before the event. I really prefer the Enforcer to Psychotog. A 6/6 that is almost always just a straight up 6/6 flying
Mhm.
is super relevant. For closing out games when you need to, and also just for being a beefy guy that doesn't have conditions on him like Psychotog does.
Were there any, like, outside of burn, which you are overly heavily preparing for? Do you feel like slowing your build down a bit between Gaia's Blessing and a bit and more 4 drops and just a heavier mana base? Do you think that like changed your matchup spread against anything? Like essentially, like if I was playing stock Growatog, and I'm like, oh yeah, my matchups are this across the board. Is pivoting into the beefier version that you played? Do you think that there are any adjustments that need to be made outside of burn that like a Growatog pilot might not pay attention to if they were coming to Gaia's Blessing Tog? Also, is there a specific name that you're giving your version? Slow Grow?
Yeah, I like to call it slow grow. Although I'm also partial to long game. If Growatog with Mystic Enforcer is game now, then this
Mm-hmm.
is the Durdley version.
All right, so we'll poll that in the comments. Everybody get in what the version of this. Those lists will be in the comments. Like it'll be there for everybody to look at. So vote on what you think the best name for this thing would be. Slow Grow right now is the front runner.
Yeah, I usually call it slow grow.
Slow Grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there another when you're playing Gaia's Blessing main? Did that change? Like, oh yeah, I'm going to play fewer graveyard interaction spells post board, or do you need essentially give me a rundown of like what were the matchups that you were like fearing in your build versus where Growatog might be, like normal stock Growatog might be a little bit different.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think like when I think about adding blessing, I think about how I think about what you can cut. And in my list, the Fire Ice and the Mana Leak were really easy cuts because those are basically like swords and counterspell number 5. And when you have blessing, you have like an arbitrarily large number of swords and counterspells if you get to, make it that long. Obviously, that's not the same as actually just putting another copy for you to actually draw, but that was the thinking. I think in terms of matchups, I really feel the difference against control decks and any decks that overload on removal. So, one of the archetypes that we can actually struggle against is like random mid-range that just has a bunch of ways to get rid of your creatures. And, I was playing in the Fall Brawl against this like 5-color domain deck that did have Gaea's Blessing. I think I lost a game because I just realized that all my creatures were exiled or in my graveyard. And with Blessing, being able to bring your creatures back kind of mitigates that problem. It also gives a control deck something that they have to, you know, choose whether to counter. Kind of feels bad to counter a Gaia's Blessing, but if that Gaia's Blessing is stocking your deck up with more counter spells or more AKs or whatever it is, then it's a difficult choice that you're giving your opponent.
Yeah, I was going to ask with the because when we were talking about Growatog, and obviously it can go long, but I remember that the first thing that you had mentioned with Growatog was that it gets to recycle your creatures, so that way you can like run them out if they go into removal. It's okay because you know that you'll have forever creatures. Did was there a consideration that like, oh, why not like moving from Gaia's Blessing into what you were talking about with Unearth? Was there has Gaia's Blessing and Unearth been fighting for the same slots, or is the being able to recur removal and counter spells like very much favor like, yes, I want to be able to play this type of control game as opposed to this type of redundant game where Unearth is obviously specifically for creatures, but it is not trying to go inevitable like Gaia's Blessing does.
Yeah, the Unearth was much more of a like tactical fun of where I was like, I again I just like want an excuse to start cutting creatures and this thing cycles. I think the juice didn't end up being worth the squeeze with that one. I mean, for one thing, it just doesn't do anything against Swords to Plowshares, which is the most common removal. And then the floor of like paying two to cycle a card is I just didn't think it was good enough. If I want to pay two to draw a card, I have like six cards that just do that in the deck. Like the first AK does that, and then all the blessings do that. I think, yeah, in general, I didn't love that card, and I also wouldn't try to stuff it in what is increasingly turning into this like Rube Goldberg machine of Durdle.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Premodern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Was there ever sideboard plans where you did move into that plan where you're like, yep, I'm just going to play one creature. I'm going to get rid of the other stuff to be able to bring in more answers and then just recycle that creature if I need to against opposing decks that either aren't Swords to Plowshares decks or something similar in that vein? Like, did you find that you were cutting creatures in certain matchups because you knew that you could go infinite?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, against like really fast combo, like, Hermit Feb or Reanimator, which I didn't see all day, or like my buddy Chris, who top aided with Angry Hermit, I definitely want to be cutting enforcers. The text just isn't as relevant. It's kind of like, it's like a true name nemesis or something where it's as good as your opponent's roadblocks for it are. And if I'm against a combo deck, like I just want to be interacting with them, sticking a mage, and then hopefully beating them down with the Dryad before they can, sculpt their hand to break free.
Yeah, that's the question after all this is like, what are the cards that you like? Were there any numbers that you would change or have changed? And are there any other cards that you're like currently in your? I mean, I love what you called before vision questing your deck. Are there any other cards that are currently being vision quested?
I haven't worked on the list a ton since LobsterCon. If I had to change anything, I might cut a land, honestly.
Which
I
land would
did
that be?
feel a little bit land heavy. I don't know what that would actually look like, but I'm tempted to go back to 18 lands. And then, the half the fun of playing the deck is making your opponent guess whether you're a Daze deck.
Right. Yeah. if you are playing, if you were thinking about cutting a land, is that because you felt like you were getting glutted on mana and then didn't have much to do with it, even though you were a Guy's Blessing deck? Or did it feel like you still want the mana, you just being able to, being too land heavy meant that you couldn't deploy the lands fast enough to actually get online?
Yeah, it more kind of manifested in flooding out and just feeling like I was drawing dead a tiny bit of the time. I mean, small sample size, but it did feel a little land heavy at times. Something I actually have been thinking about is so it was really interesting because I had the Gaia's Blessing idea like a few months ago, and then recently I saw Phil 42069, Phil Stolze, who is a big Moto player. He was playing a grow list on stream, and he also had Gaia's Blessing, which I thought was cool that he had the same idea. And then he was playing Probe, which is a card that I've cast in Pauper but never in Premodern. And I forgot that card even existed. because I like in my Vision Quest notebook, I remember jotting down, like Dream Cache, but like I don't know, is that good enough?
I can tell you from somebody who's cast many a Dream Cache at sorcery speed, it is not.
Yeah, but I think Probe or something like it is interesting. I mean, they have like the lengths to which we'll go to try and replicate Brainstorm in this format are pretty intense. Like, do I want to play Catalog? That's probably terrible. There's like Latinum's Legacy, but it gets stifled.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I've even thought about like Forbid,
Hmm.
just to pitch extra lands, but that's pushing you really, really far in a more kind of mid-rangey and controlling direction if you're signing up to cast that card.
That is a nice buyback spell though for your Queer and Dread.
It's true, yeah, and I love a Forbid, so who knows? Maybe I'll test it.
Have you? I know that you were testing Werebear. Is there any consideration that Werebear becomes that 19th land, the singleton Werebear,
Mm,
or any other type of mana? Like it's always interesting because like I've heard people talk about Growatog before, and they're like, yeah. It's like you need Mox Diamonds because your mana is terrible, but then you never want to draw your second Mox Diamond because you can't go down that many cards. If you don't draw the first Mox Diamond, then you really feel it. And then I'm like, oh well, if you're looking, I mean, and this is where I go, I don't know how, like, if you can support something like the Werebear in that 19th slot or the Birds of Paradise in that slot or anything of that ilk that can produce something. Because I've been in the space of thinking a card that, like, I came out of LobsterCon thinking about a lot was Lotus Petal.
yeah,
Even though it's a one shot, I've been thinking, like, I've been going deep on Lotus Petal, just thinking like, man, I really want these Mox Diamonds, but I don't want to go down the card. But then I'm like, how much is the color outside of the first time I need that off color actually important? Like, if I just need, to get the Queer and Dryad down, but I don't want to get the forest, is me just getting this green mana this one time good enough for me to then operate for however long until otherwise? But it's like, oh, if you were feeling like you were getting flooded, is it possible that, like, the lotus, a singleton Lotus Petal, as crazy as that sounds,
mm,
like, might be the consideration, particularly since you're in a Gaia's Blessing deck? And it's like, I don't know if these are things that have been considered, especially like as somebody who hasn't really played much Growtog, but as somebody who also is playing a deck that the mana is atrocious in. Because I find, like, when I play Gush and a Mox Diamond deck, really you're just like a 5-color mono blue deck,
right,
and it's like,
yeah.
how do we solve that problem?
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that turned me off the deck at first when I played it a handful of times was just like, oh man, like Mox Diamond isn't a land, like we have to play City of Brass, that hurts, ouch. It's a tough problem to solve. I don't think I'd do Lotus Petal just because we're already throwing away cards on our Mox Diamonds.
Mhm.
I think if I cut a card for a land, at this point, it might honestly just be another opt because I'm only playing 3 opts in that list.
Sure.
I mean, I think like obviously you're supposed to add 2 cantrips for a land, but I feel like I'm at more lands than is strictly necessary at 19. So I feel like adding an opt, shaving a land is reasonable. Werebear's an interesting one. I mean, I played it in the Bant threshold lists that I was trying to make into a thing. I really liked it there because it gives you the second green pip for Terravore.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a grow deck, the fact that it only adds green is kind of a huge liability just because you are trying to make rainbow mana and especially blue. And so paying green to get green is usually not going to bail you out of a tight spot. I think if I just wanted like a quick and dirty threat, then it would be Goose.
Have you considered, now that we're talking about potentially additional creatures to throw into the creature suite, if you felt like you were being flooded, was there any consideration, since sometimes you'll have, whether it's the Dryad or the Meddling Mage naming something critical, was there ever consideration to playing something a la Mother of Runes or Sylvan Safekeeper in those spots to sort of protect the queen strategies in those positions if you have space?
Oh man, that's really interesting. I love a Sylvan Safekeeper. I think because the creature density is so low in these decks, something like that makes a little less sense to me because you're not going to have that many targets. And if I'm going to be protecting like a Dryad, I'd rather protect it with like a Mage or a counterspell. I could see a world where you're going wider though, and maybe have some of those cards. And I think that's the cool thing about the Grow archetype is that, some people are playing it like a Delver deck and like playing a lot of Dazes and playing Nimble Mongoose. And some people are, doing things like cutting Dryad and playing like Psychotog alongside Call the Herd. So people have their approaches, and I think it's, it's like one of those decks where the core is a set number of cards, but you can get pretty spicy, and I actually don't think we're that close to whatever an optimized list looks like. I think there's still a lot of room for experimentation.
Yeah, I think that's like the most interesting part of any pre-modern build is that like it always seems like there's an evolution to be had, even though the pool is fixed. Last couple of things that I want to ask about the deck, because like I'm starting to iterate on it in my head, and I'm like curious to like test it out online. When going through and figuring out the interaction suite, I know that you'd mentioned that sometimes you'd play duress. Did you play a black splash at all in your list?
No, although I mentioned Rob McCoy, who had that top 8 list that I really liked. He was kind of doing what I ended up doing with the lands, but instead of splashing green, he was playing a black splash. So he was on like one basic swamp, one polluted delta. And this guy cooks a lot, by the way. We have lots of weird discourse about adding weird stuff to the deck. He actually was playing it this year again, and he was on a Burning Wish sideboard,
Yeah,
which I think is super cool.
super cool. Yeah, it's spells that get spells. Yeah.
Yeah, totally right. Just chain it forever. I'm not that high on Psychotog these days, which I think is a good reason to have a black splash. I tried a list with a basic swamp to cast Psychotogs and Duresses, and as good as Duress is with Meddling Mage, I just didn't like it as much as, having the freedom to just hold up blue and then maybe, cast an AK or an opt end step if you don't get to get something juicy with a counterspell.
With and this is I don't know if anybody has actually endeavored to this part, but because it's something that I always think about with Mox Diamond, particularly when you're playing anything that's in the Bant space, has there been any consideration to in that slot for where you're like an additional cantrip, has Mental Note come to mind as an option now that you're playing Gaia's Blessing?
Yeah, I feel like now I'm turning into like a walking encyclopedia of other players' decks, but there actually was a Mental Note Miracle Grow deck at LobsterCon.
Mental Grow sounds sick.
Yeah, it looked really cool. Yeah, shout out to Colton Abrams. I know I talked to you at the event, but we didn't talk about Grow at all. But yeah, doing stuff with like Miri's Guile and obviously Porton with Mental Note. I tried it as a fun of when I was running Call of the Herd, because it flips Call of the Herd, it flips Ray of Revelation, it flips an AK. I think it's one of those cards, like I feel the same way about Predict, where you kind of just have to cross the Rubicon and really build your deck around it. Like running
Yeah.
it as a one of is a little hard to support because you're just going to cast a lot of blind predicts or blind
Sure.
mental notes for no value.
Yeah. There's a certain amount of infrastructure that goes along with it. I guess that sort of lends itself to the follow-up that I was going to ask, going a little bit too far off the Rubicon. But I was going to ask, have you ever considered Riftstone Portal as a way to solve those mana problems between Mox Diamond, and then if you were looking to play the catalog or anything that's sort of additional discard outlets, that Riftstone Portal as a way to be able to turn on your islands to make the actual requisite mana that you would like to, and also it can make it so that your City of Brasses can tap for mana without pinging you for damage. Wait, is that true? I actually don't know if that's true. City of Brass has it's whenever it's tapped, right? So it doesn't matter if it taps for its color or if it's
right. Yeah, City will trigger if they port you, which
right.
that hurts.
That hurts. Okay, yeah. So maybe
From
not
experience.
That. But we're going down. I'm curious. Is Riftstone Portal too far off?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I think because Riftstone Portal, that just taps for colorless when it's in play, right?
That's for colorless. If it's in the yard, then all of your lands are savannas.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you wanted to push the list in a direction where you're like really aggressively like binning cards, like with Mental Note or even Mulch or something, then maybe that becomes a contender. I actually think there's maybe some space to do what some of the tribe players are doing and get really weird and maybe start bringing in like quiet speculation, because I love the idea of like quiet spec for 2 Cabal Therapy and an Acorn Harvest, start
getting them.
therapy, shred their hand, grow the Dryad, but that might be Christmas land at this point.
Yeah, but I feel like Miracle Grow is in the Christmas land vision part of the, because it seems like all the ideas when we were talking about them while we were at LobsterCon It just seemed like there was still so much space that all had legitimacy that it's just like it seems like a very engaging, fun puzzle that does have legs like in every permutation, and then it's just trying to figure out what is the actual strongest version of that. But then it's like, how do we even determine when that is?
Yeah, yeah, and like one of the big strengths of the deck is that you get to cast all the best spells in 5 colors, but that's also one of the biggest weaknesses. And it's also one of the biggest like deck building traps because you're constantly contending with the danger of cool things as you tinker with the deck.
Yeah, we haven't even gone into, Living Wish considerations yet, right?
No, we have not.
So before we hop off, first off, thank you very much for hopping on and talking about Growatog. I'm very curious to keep up with your list as you continue to evolve it, because I am currently in the market for a deck to just commit to and practice. I got the Sacred Torch Showdown coming up in July.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which is the next big pre-modern event post LobsterCon. I know that hopefully there aren't too many Enchantress players there, because how do I ever beat that deck? But I'll be curious to get a follow up after as we approach there to see if Growatog is the way to go. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up the episode?
Just want to give a shout out to East Bay Magic the Gathering Punks, hometown crew. They are the reason that I went to LobsterCon this year. We had 8 of us, and it was everyone's first LobsterCon, and had a blast. So yeah, if you're in the Bay Area, look us up. You can find us on the internet and come to one of our meetups, and it'll be a good time.
Hell yeah, we will. Any links that Austen shares with us, we'll put in the description below, so check that out if you're in that area. And then also, Austen, this invitation is open to you and anybody who's listening. If you would like to write about your deck or anything else about Premodern for EternalDurdles.com, you are welcome. Consider it an open platform to write whatever you would like to write about. I'd be happy to publish you on there and spread the word for the things that you love about this format and the decks that you particularly enjoy building around. Until then, Austen, thank you so much. And everybody, we will catch you next time.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button. It grows the legacy content ecosystem we all love by relaying to the platform that you are part of our passionate community.
And to go even further, click the links for subscription or to support directly via Patreon to help us create more content for you. Patreon supporters get 4 exclusive extra episodes per month. If you're listening on an audio platform, head over to patreon.com/EternalDurdles.
Thanks so much for your support.
We'll see you in the next one.